there, Kyle Katarn here. Today we're going to be talking about Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. So, first impressions. This book is totally nuts. I really liked it. There were some sections that would have been really hard to follow just with the wealth of new information, characters, names, and faces. It would have been really hard to follow if not for all of the awesome concept art that came out to supplement this book's release. I'm a very visually oriented learner, so when I have a whole lot of new names, it really helps me to be able to put faces to them in my mind. Also, having art for vehicles and fighters to supplement a Star Wars book is pretty freaking rad. So, Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule is the launching book for an entire new era of Star Wars storytelling. It takes place from 200 BBY all the way up to 80 years before the Battle of Yavin, which places it between the Knights of the Old Republic era and the original trilogy, right in the middle there by a couple hundred years. It's very exciting to read a book in a brand new era like this because, for example, when I watch something set in the original trilogy, you always kind of have to bob and weave between these other pre-existing pieces of established canon that are floating there in the way, and you can't have continuity issues. You have to make sure that there's no contradictions. There's none of that constraint here. You know, it's a very freeing experience, I'm sure, as someone creating content in it, as well as an audience member being able to just eat it all up. You know, take the references. And there were quite a few references to other pre-existing parts of Star Wars, but so much of it was brand new. And it really felt refreshing. I really enjoyed this book. At this point, I will let you know that there's a lot of spoilers coming. So if you have not read it and are planning to read it, you might not want to watch the rest of this review until you're done. If you're not going to read the book and you still want to know what happens, though, I'll try my best to summarize it for you. So the beginning of this book is insane. I was not prepared for so many emotional gut punches right off of the bat. So it starts with the great hyperspace disaster. A ship called the Legacy Run explodes while it's in hyperspace. But not before doing a really good job of making us care about the characters on this damn ship. You might think that a ship exploding in hyperspace wouldn't be that big of a deal, that it would simply evaporate or never re-emerge into subspace. Well, actually, it's the opposite. It's quite a massive fucking problem, and debris and shrapnel starts shooting out, emerging from hyperspace into subspace all over the galaxy, just destroying everything in its path just through sheer mass and velocity. These are massive hunks of durasteel and, chunks of spaceship. One planet in the path of this destruction is called Hetzel Prime in the Hetzel system, and we follow a couple of establishing characters as they scramble to come together to stop the debris from destroying the planet. Some distress calls get received by the Jedi, and they come in to the rescue. And it all feels very familiar in terms of, Jedi coming and saving the day. The first two Jedi that we get to meet are Avar Kriss and Loden Greatstorm. As soon as she arrives on the scene, Avar Kriss busts out some epic battle meditation, just like in Knights of the Old Republic. So working together, the Jedi try to destroy the ship debris that is hurtling towards the planet. But suddenly they realize some sections of the ship still have survivors on them, so they use the Force to try to slow down the debris enough to evacuate the people on the wreckage. Things seem like they're going well, until they discover there's another massive piece of debris, and this one is filled with Tabana gas, and it is headed straight for the sun of the Hetzel system. Tabana gas being extremely volatile, that reaction would wipe out the entire Hetzel system, so this is a big deal. We've seen a similar risky scenario in Star Wars Rebels when the Y-Wings have to escort Mon Mothma through the Tabana cloud. So with the entire Hetzel system in danger, all of the Jedi come together to force push this massive object out of the way to safety. And when I say all the Jedi, I mean all the Jedi. So Avar Kriss's main Force talent, if you will, is connecting and amplifying the Force bond present between all Jedi in the galaxy. All of them, and she fosters that connection and channels it through herself like a Force lightning rod, and every Jedi in the Order works together to push this massive object out of the way. And it's a beautifully written passage. Charles Soule is a much more eloquent describer of events than I am, and I really recommend you read that section if you haven't. It was probably the first epic Star Wars moment in this new era. I got chills when I read that section. So after the crisis is over, the Jedi return to Coruscant to meet with Chancellor Lina Soh. Having been a reader and watcher of Star Wars for many decades, I was immediately suspicious of the Chancellor. I'm like, okay, what's her deal? What's her angle? What's going on here? Turns out she's on the level. For once, we have a Chancellor of the Republic who seems to be the real deal. And that's very refreshing to see. So the Jedi decide they're going to shut down all the hyperspace lanes until they figure out how to deal with these emergencies, which is what they call it when more debris emerges into subspace at random locations. And their decision to shut down the hyperlanes kind of marks the end of Act 1. So now we get to the fun stuff. The villains. The Nihil. are badass. As a concept, I really like the idea of this faction group. They really remind me of like a Mad Max street gang or like something out of the Warriors. Very entertaining. The character dialogue is all really like entertaining to listen to as well. They're a very interesting villain concept, and I like the fact that they're not all one race. It's not like these evil aliens from this bad planet. It's like, no, you got a couple Twi'lek in there. There's a Quarren in there. They're subscribing to a way of life. You know, they're like nomadic raiders, but with a twist. So there are 3 main factions to the Nihil, each one with their own leader. You've got Kasif, you've got Lorna D, and you've got this other guy, Pan Eta, who isn't really featured in the book, but he's the leader of the 3rd faction. We deal primarily with Kasif and Lorna D, but the real guy that you want to watch for is Marchion Ro, the Eye of the Nihil. The Eye is his title, and he is their leader, and he is a total badass. The reason he's the leader is because he has a very valuable prisoner, an old lady named Mari Santeka. She's basically a human Purgle. She's extremely naturally gifted in hyperspace knowledge and hyperspace navigation. She's related to Lor Santeka from The Force Awakens. It turns out the Santekas are like a really industrious, wealthy family in the galaxy because they were pretty early on to discover a lot of the knowledge about hyperspace. So the Santekas like built the hyperlanes is kind of the saying around the galaxy. But a lot of that comes from Mari Santeka, who the Nihil have in custody. And she can basically plot hyperjumps without a Navi computer. So she's extremely gifted in this way, and they're taking full advantage of that knowledge and ability. They've been using her to chart passages through the hyperlanes, which have now been shut down. This woman is so valuable that the Nihil are only keeping her alive for her navigational abilities. Like, she's not really all there inside. She's kind of like a shell of a person, like not fully aware. Her description is almost robotic. So the Nihil decide to get the bright idea to kidnap this farmer dude and his family and hold them for ransom. And this act is kind of what kicks off the 2nd act of the book. So at this point, the story kind of breaks off into 3 plot lines, and the chapters go back and forth between them, and the idea is that they're occurring simultaneously with each other. So the first of these 3 arcs, if you will, deals with Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann, who is a very well-regarded Jedi, but not quite a Jedi Master like Avar Kriss is, and they have been tasked with investigating the hyperspace disaster, trying to determine what destroyed the Legacy Run, and seeing if they can uncover anything that'll help them prevent future emergencies. The investigation takes them to a planet where they recover a black box type device from the Legacy Run, and the information on that implicates the Nihil as having been involved. It talks about how they may have blocked a hyperlane with a massive object. Meanwhile, as the Nihil are kidnapping this poor farmer and his family for ransom, Loden Greatstorm and his Padawan happen to be training nearby, so they go to respond, and it kicks off this massive, drawn-out chase, which kind of reminded me of The Last Jedi, where everyone's going at the same speed, and they're slowly trying to gain ground or lose ground, and like they're waiting for them to run out of fuel. It was a whole affair. The writing in this sequence is actually really cool. When they do catch up with them, it splits off into like these little individual perspectives. One Jedi kind of like faces off with a Nihil sniper and manages to capture the farmer mother. We follow Greatstorm's Padawan as he rescues the daughter. At this point, the only prisoner left is the father farmer, and Loden Greatstorm boards the Nihil ship and he's trying to rescue him. Things don't go great. They get surrounded and captured by Lorna D. So while all this is going on, Kasif, who was that other leader of the 3rd Nihil faction, has been taking full advantage of Mari Santeka's hyperspace knowledge and taking advantage of the fact that the hyperspace disaster happened. And he's been going around to all these planets and extorting them for knowledge of when these emergencies might happen so that people are able to safeguard themselves. So this business takes him to Eriadu, famously the future homeworld of Grand Moff Tarkin. And he does the same thing here. He extorts them for some sort of a warning about emergencies. And as luck would have it, as he's getting paid, there was a miscalculation. And an emergence happens right there. And millions of people die. It's an absolute disaster. It's devastating. And the governor of Eriadu channels a little bit of Tarkin energy and basically calls him out and says, like, we will never forget this. Like, you are not safe. Like, you have a death mark forever, basically. So he really put his foot in it. So this disaster on Eriadu kind of closes out the 2nd act. And at this point, we return to all the Jedi and all the Republic coming together to basically decide whether or not they're going to go to war with the Nihil, since they've uncovered this new information. And honestly, it's a pretty depressing turn of events, because the Jedi were so idealistic and full of optimism about launching the Starlight Beacon and ushering in this new era of prosperity. And now here we are talking about going to war again. So a lot of the Jedi were pretty crestfallen about it, and I think the writing conveyed that really well. Meanwhile, with the proverbial Lothcat out of the bag, the Nihil are having a meeting too. Basically, damage control, what do we do, how do we address this situation? And they decide that Marchion Ro is going to send Kassav and Kassav's fleet, so a third of the Nihil's strength, to go and meet the Republic head on and just have a big pitched battle. Seems kind of like a suicide mission, but Kassav is down, Marchion Ro sends him out. The battle itself is crazy. The Nihil seem to have the upper hand for most of it because they're using really dirty tactics and extremely unconventional maneuvers. They're taking full advantage of San Tekka's hyperspace knowledge in a way that I've never seen before. They're basically like phasing in and out of existence and doing what I can only describe as like hyperspace micro jumps around the battlefield rapidly, so fast that the enemy ships aren't able to target them or track them effectively. And they really have the upper hand until suddenly, halfway through the battle, Marchion Ro sends a message to Kassav basically being like, hey, by the way, I know you killed my father, and reveals this entire elaborate plan was just to get rid of Kassav. And suddenly their technological advantage of this hyperspace, he alters it. Marchion Ro alters it so that suddenly, instead of jumping from one side of the battlefield to the other with an instant tactical advantage, they're jumping directly into other ships, into each other, like directly underneath laser cannons, and they're just getting devastated all of a sudden. And Marchion reveals that this whole plan was to lose so that he could get rid of Kassav, and the fleet is just obliterated. And that's not all of the Nihil, but 1/3 of the Nihil's forces. Kassav's faction is obliterated. It's a pretty shocking development at this turn in the book, and the writing is really good here too. People from Eriadu catch up with Kassav. They board his ship. He knows he's not going to make it. He still tries, and they just cut him down. No mercy. It was pretty awesome. It's definitely the end of Kassav's fleet, but it's not the end of the Nihil, because remember, Kassav only commanded about 1/3 of their forces. So the story wraps up with this big realization that Marchion Ro has done all of this to create the illusion that the Republic just defeated the Nihil, and that Kassav's fleet was all of them, and so that now the Nihil is dead and gone, and they're not going to be on the defensive anymore. Which is pretty brilliant. It's 2 birds with 1 stone. Now he has the ability to operate in the shadows and make his plans, and he doesn't have to watch his back because the Jedi aren't on alert for Nihil forces, and he's got rid of this dude who he thinks killed his father. So it looks like everything's coming up Millhouse for Marchion Ro. He talks about having everything he needs, the time to plan, the space to do it, and most importantly, he has a Jedi prisoner in Loden Greatstorm. He's got him and the farmer, who is strung up next to him, and he's being tortured, and the pain emanating from this farmer is interrupting Loden's connection to the Force. And then Marchion Ro takes Loden's lightsaber and kills the farmer in front of him, telling Loden, I have big plans for you. It's very clear that Marchion Ro has a personal vendetta against the Jedi, but we as the audience do not know what that is yet. And meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Jedi are celebrating their victory because they think they've won. They think the Nihil are gone. We see them toasting to each other and, feeling hopeful once again that the Starlight Beacon might be able to be prosperous. All except Elzar Mann, who is having a vision, an ominous vision of the future, of suffering and torment. He seems like the only one who knows that the threat is still out there. And that's where the book ends, with a strong setup for a sequel. It was awesome. It definitely ranks in my top 10 for Star Wars canon or Legends, honestly. My initial thoughts on finishing the book was really just that I wanted to sit down and pick up the next one, honestly. They've done a really good job of introducing and establishing new characters, making you care about them, and helping to illustrate the differences in this era of Star Wars versus things that we've seen that have come before. And I can't wait to see where the story leads. I really, really liked it. There were plenty of details that I left out of this. This was a pretty condensed synopsis, so if you want to read it for yourself, there's plenty more that I didn't spoil. I also found a handful of references to pre-existing Star Wars canon in this, which is always a treat. For example, as I said before, in the beginning of the novel, when Avar Kriss uses battle meditation, just like Knights of the Old Republic, even though it isn't explicitly named, that's definitely what she's doing. They talk about how the planet Hetzal is developing this brand new substance, Bacta, for the first time, which is fascinating. That makes the Hetzal system, specifically Hetzal Prime, the new canon origin of Bacta, whereas in Legends, the Varactics were the origin of Bacta. While we're on Hetzal, there's also a reference to the Selkath potentially being one of the rivals to the Bacta industry, implying that they are currently working on their alternative to Bacta, Kolto from Knights of the Old Republic. There are a couple scenes in this book that take place on Coruscant in an area called Monument Plaza. So Monument Plaza itself is a massive Easter egg. So in canon, Monument Plaza is said to be constructed at the peak of a mountaintop and represents the only traversable original terrain on all of Coruscant. It was a concept originally created by Ralph McQuarrie for some of his original concept art for Imperial Center, and it's one of my favorite of his pieces, actually. And we've seen it before in an episode of the Clone Wars, although it was never named. The planet of Bastion gets a shout-out. In Legends, Bastion was the seat of power of the Imperial Remnant. It first showed up in Spectre of the Past by Timothy Zahn. Ephrona, which is another one of the major settings of the book, also gets mentioned in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic, but I think that's less of an Easter egg and more of a coordinated effort to establish this new canon. Also, some fun facts. Not only is Yoda running around as a sexy young Jedi Knight in this time period, but Yarael Poof and Oppo Rancisis are also members of the Council from the High Republic onwards. Yarael Poof never had an age in canon, so that's perfectly acceptable, but this is a bit of a retcon for Oppo Rancisis, who originally was born in 200 BBY. At this point, he would have to be just a little bit older to already be serving on the Council at this time. And my favorite reference that I caught is that we get a shout out to Ylesia. Ylesia is a planet from A.C. Crispin's Han Solo trilogy. It's the home of a cult that uses their weird alien pheromones to enslave humans to do a bunch of work for them. And it's where the first love of Han's life comes from. The story begins and ends on that planet. I'm sure there were a ton more references and Easter eggs. If you found some, please let me know in the comments because I want to know what they are as well. I thoroughly enjoyed Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. I currently have Into the Dark by Claudia Gray. I'm getting started on that one right now too. You can wait for a review from that. It'll be coming soon. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out the rest of the channel for more content, reactions, and reviews. Leave me a comment if you have a question or something to say. Let me know how you're liking Light of the Jedi or the High Republic in general so far. You can catch me on Twitch, streaming 4 days a week over at twitch.tv/KyleKatarn. We just started our new playthrough of The Force Unleashed, but we've also got Squadrons, The Old Republic, Empire at War, lots of good stuff going on over there. We also have a Discord community. You can find a link to that in the description of the video. If you want to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/KyleKatarn channel. You'll get full-length reactions, early access, a couple exclusive videos like a series on the collection, a studio tour, some Discord perks as well. Thanks again, and as always, may the Force be with you.